What's up, guys? Welcome back to Fish the Moment. So recently I've been getting a lot of comments from you guys asking me to make a video on how I mark fish or cover offshore and then actually stand up and make a cast on that spot and hit it every time. It seems like a lot of you guys are having trouble actually getting your bait down to the spots you mark on your graph. So today I'm going to show you 2 easy ways to make sure you hit those offshore structure spots you mark on every cast first time. So let's get into it. Okay, so the first way that you can guarantee that you'll hit those offshore structure spots on your first cast is by using a marker buoy. And these marker buoys are pretty much sold at any fishing or tackle store, and they're super cheap. And it's basically just a string attached to a piece of lead and that buoy, and it'll basically sit up on top of the water on any place you throw it on. And so what I'm gonna do is I'm actually going to idle over some of these spots where I see fish, and I'm actually seeing in my graph right here a bunch of fish over this rocky spot. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna drive over the top of this rocky spot, and you can see there's just fish everywhere on the graph here. And right as I get over the top of that rocky spot, right when it drops off into deeper water, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna wait 1, 2, 3 seconds, then I'm gonna toss the marker buoy out in front of the boat and just to the right of the boat, and you'll see that marker buoy is going down behind me. What that's going to do is it's actually going to get that marker buoy to stay off the spot a little bit. It's not going to drop right on top of those fish, but it'll be close enough to those fish that I'll be able to make a cast on them pretty much every time. So let's get up on the trolling motor and show you how I actually hit the spot using that marker buoy.
So before we move on, I'm sure there's plenty of people who are still confused about the image I just showed on my fish finder, my hummingbird unit, and when to actually drop that marker buoy. And so let me explain what that image on the graph was showing and when you need to drop that marker buoy depending on the image you see on the screen. So for anyone who owns a fish finder or graph, you're probably at least a little bit familiar with how they work. Basically, a graph has a transducer that you'll put on the bottom of your boat, and it will send out sonar waves in a cone if you're using 2D sonar or your downscan. And that cone will scan the bottom, and it'll bring back an image that will come up on your screen. And a lot of people get caught up in how this cone actually produces the image and all that, but that really doesn't matter, especially when you're first learning how to read your electronics. Don't get caught up in that. What's really important though when you're trying to drop a marker buoy offshore is knowing where that image is relative to your boat and where you're actually sitting in your boat. So if you own a boat with side imaging, then your transducer is most likely mounted on the outside of your boat near your engine in the back of the boat. And all of the images that you see on your graph actually originate from this transducer. And then if your graph doesn't have side imaging, it just has, let's say, traditional 2D sonar, then you may have your transducer in the bottom of your boat, again near the back, in kind of the back compartment where your batteries are. And in either of those cases, the image that shows up on your graph is originating from the back of your boat where that transducer is mounted. So if we look at a recording from the downscan from my hummingbird fish finder, you'll see that the image is originating from the right side of the screen, and it scrolls from right to left. And the image, again, is originating from your transducer. So if we kind of move this image around, you can actually see that this image starts from the back of your boat, right where that transducer is mounted. And so whatever is showing up on the far right side of your screen is what's directly below that transducer in the water. So directly below the back of your boat. And so the reason that I said that you should wait 3 seconds before throwing your marker buoy after coming over the top of an offshore piece of cover or structure like that rock pile is because right now you're actually going over the top of the structure, and then you wait 1, 2, 3 seconds and then throw the marker buoy so that you actually give the chance for the back of your boat to get off of that cover or structure and make sure that you're not throwing that marker buoy on top of whatever you're trying to fish. And so anything that's showing up on the left side of your screen is basically the history or a recording of what was underneath your boat, and then what's underneath your boat right in this exact moment is what's ever on the furthest right side of your screen. And so I get a lot of questions about that on a lot of my graph videos, and so hopefully that clears it up and makes it a little bit easier to understand why you have to wait 3 seconds to throw that marker buoy.
Okay, so now I'm back up on the trolling motor and I actually moved the boat back around the structure, and so now I'm back where I basically started graphing, and that marker buoy is about a cast length away from me, and you can see it just out here in front of the boat. And if you remember, I drove over that spot, and then right as I saw the rock pile end, I waited 3 seconds, and then I dropped that buoy out to the right. So that means that that marker buoy now is going to be just past the structure and to the right. And so what I basically need to do is just make sure that my cast lands right in line with that marker buoy and to the left, just like that. And so don't actually turn around right away and start fishing close to that marker buoy, because what will happen is that if you hook a fish, you can actually get that fish tangled up in the marker buoy. So instead, move back to the opposite side of the structure, as far away from that buoy as you can, then make your cast, and that'll help you avoid getting caught up in it, and you can also make sure you're hitting that spot every time. Now, the one annoying thing about using a marker buoy is that you a lot of times have to reach down here, and you have to wind that thing up. And if your boat's in 50 feet of water like mine is right now, it takes a long time to wind that thing in. And so what I'm going to do is actually show you a technique that uses your electronics rather than this marker buoy, and it's actually just as easy to hit that cast every single time with your electronics, and it also helps you avoid having to drop this marker buoy down and waste all this time winding it up. Okay, so let's say you're like me and you like to fish 20 or 30 offshore structure spots in a day when you're really on a good deep bite, and you don't want to have to throw that marker buoy out every single time and then wind it up before you leave. Well, the other way that you can actually mark those offshore structure spots and then hit them every single time with your first cast is using your electronics. Okay, so here's my down scan, and as you can see, we're driving up over the top of a hump right now. And there's two ways that you can mark a waypoint on these offshore structures. The first is right when you get to the top of that offshore structure, you can hit mark or waypoint, and that's gonna drop a waypoint right on that spot. You can see my waypoint got created right here in line with the top of that hump. But a lot of times that's not 100% accurate. And so if you have any graph that was made in the last 8 years, either Humminbird or Lowrance, you should have the capability to actually press your directional pad, or I have a little cursor thing here, and it'll create a cursor that you can move around your screen. You actually move it right to the top of that hump I'm trying to target, then hit mark, and it drops that waypoint right on top of that spot, which is awesome. And so now you have a waypoint on your graph directly on that spot. So if we move over here to my image, it's waypoint 149. You can see I have a ton of waypoints here because I fished this spot several times. And when we zoom in here, we can see right here, this is waypoint 149, and it's right off the tip of this little hump, right out in the middle, and you have that spot. Okay, so now we have that spot marked on this graph, and I actually have this Humminbird unit in the back of my boat hooked up to the graph up in front of my boat up there with an Ethernet cable. And so what that means is that because they're linked together, I can go up to my front graph and I can actually pull up my mapping, and you can see all of the waypoints that I mark on the back of my boat are now linked up to my front graph. And so what I can do now is actually try to find that waypoint in here and then line my little guy up here, this little boat icon, up with that waypoint and make my cast, and we'll be good to go. But that's a little bit easier said than done, so let me explain how I actually get that done.
So to reiterate one of the points I kind of made earlier, to get this technique to work, you have to have two graphs on your boat with GPS capabilities. One near your steering wheel and then one up by your trolling motor. And if both of your graphs have GPS capabilities and they're made by the same brand or the same manufacturer, then you can normally share waypoints between these graphs using an Ethernet cable or an interlink cable. And this is really important for this technique I'm about to talk about, because you want to make sure that the waypoints you mark on the graph by your steering wheel will show up on the graph by the trolling motor. This will save you a ton of time and make it way easier to be able to hit those offshore spots on every cast. But again, you have to have GPS on both graphs, and they have to be made by the same manufacturer. They can't be two different brands of graphs. And in addition to having your two graphs linked up so they share waypoints, you're also going to have to change some of the settings on the graph by your trolling motor to get this technique to work. The first setting you're going to want to change on your graph is your chart orientation, and you want that set to be north up. And basically that locks the top of your screen pointing towards the north, and it will ensure that your map isn't spinning on you, and that the only thing that's actually going to spin is your boat icon. And this is really important to make sure that you can actually line up your boat to any waypoints you're going to try to cast at. If you change the chart orientation to course up, a lot of times the entire map will spin in a circle, and it's really disorienting and hard to figure out how to cast anywhere. And so always change that orientation to north up to start out with. The second setting you're going to want to change is adding a heading arrow to your boat icon. And this is basically just a long line that extends from the tip of your boat icon, and it gives you a better idea of where the nose of your boat is pointing, and it also allows you to line up the nose of your boat with any waypoints you're going to try to cast at a lot easier. And I don't know how to change this setting on every single graph, it's different, but it should be in your menus under the navigation tab, so just go there and then add that heading arrow, and it's going to make this a lot easier. And then the final setting that you should change on your graph is adding casting rings to your waypoints. And casting rings are basically just circles that surround a waypoint, and you can choose how far away the edge of that circle is from your waypoint. And this is super helpful when you're trying to avoid drifting up on top of the offshore spots you mark. And I used to have a bad habit of getting the trolling motor up on top of any waypoints that I was trying to fish. But with these casting rigs, I could set the ring to be 80 feet, and I'll know that if I stop at the edge of that ring, I'm 80 feet away from that waypoint, which is perfect for my long casts offshore. And if you're just getting into fishing and you can't cast a bait a super long way, you can set that casting ring down to 50 feet, and you don't have to worry about spooking the fish as long as you stay at least about 50 feet away from that offshore structure. If you get any closer than that, you may actually spook them with your trolling motor, so try to stay at least 50 feet away. And so normally I set my casting rings between 50 and 100 feet, and you should be good to go. Okay, so now it's finally time to explain this technique. So let's assume that you've graphed over this offshore spot and made a waypoint with the graph near your steering wheel right on that rock pile, and then that waypoint was shared with the graph up by your trolling motor, and that graph by your trolling motor has all the settings I just talked about. So first up, before you put your trolling motor down to fish, try to stay at least 100 yards away from that waypoint before you start fishing it. And the reason for that is we actually need to get a running start at this waypoint to make sure that the arrow in the front of our boat is pointing directly at that waypoint. So if we take a look at this image from my GPS, my boat is sitting stationary in my garage, you'll notice that the arrow is spinning all over the place in a circle, or sometimes the icon will just change to a little donut instead. And this happens when your boat is stationary or not moving very quickly. So to make sure you're actually lining up correctly on these waypoints, you want to make sure that the arrow that's sticking out from that boat icon is pointing directly at the waypoint you're trying to fish. And to get it to happen, you actually have to have your boat moving at least 1.5 miles to 2 miles an hour to get that boat to stop spinning in a circle on your graph. And so that's why you have to get that 100-yard running start. And so what I'll do is start 100 yards away from that waypoint and then start using my trolling motor to direct the nose of that boat directly at that waypoint. And I'll look at my graph and make sure that that heading arrow is pointing directly at that waypoint. And again, you need to be going at least 1.5 miles to 2 miles an hour to get that arrow to track straight and true. And then all I'm going to do is line up that arrow directly with the waypoint on my graph and wait until my boat gets to the edge of that casting ring. And then when the boat icon on my graph hits the edge of that casting ring, I'm going to make a cast directly out in front of the nose of my boat. because that boat icon, remember, is pointed directly at that waypoint. And so as long as I cast directly in front of my boat, straight out from the nose, I'm gonna hit that waypoint almost every single time, unless that casting ring is too far away or too close, and my cast is either going way past it or it's landing short.
Okay, so I got that good running start, and the arrow on the tip of my boat icon is pointed directly at my waypoint, and now all I have to do is wait until my boat gets just on the outside edge of that ring, and just wait just a second. There we go. And then I just make a cast straight out in front of my boat, just like that. And that bait should now land just past that offshore hump I marked. And all I have to do now is wait for that bait to sink down there and then reel it in nice and slow, and I should be right on that sweet spot I marked. And this technique is a little bit harder to get down than using that marker buoy because you don't have any visual cues to throw at, but once you figure it out, it's really not that hard, and it's going to save you a ton of time on the water, and it's a lot more convenient than trying to drop that marker buoy every time. So guys, that's it. Those are the two ways that I mark offshore structure and then actually make casts on them, so I hit that sweet spot with my first cast every time. So I hope you enjoyed the video and learned something, and hopefully this will help you become a better and more efficient offshore fisherman. And if you did, hit like and subscribe down below. Also share the video with a friend. It really helps out the channel. Really, hitting the like button, subscribing, and sharing are the three best ways that you can help support this content and help me continue to make great content in the future. So hope you enjoyed this video again, and I'll see you next time.